Okay, good afternoon everyone. Today I'm going to be talking about a project that I've been developing over the last 2 years. It's a collaboration between the Centre for Regional Economic and Social Research, where I'm based at Sheffield Hallam University, working with Lund University in Sweden, and it also involves colleagues from Nottingham Trent University. The project's called Walking with Energy, and it's all about trying to tackle so-called energy invisibility and reconnect citizens with where the heat and energy that's so vital to their everyday lives, or our everyday lives, is coming from and what's being burnt to generate it. Through the project, we're trying to challenge the dominant practice of simply clicking a switch to access heat and energy and thinking no more about it. It feels like the right time to run a project like this, as we're at such a critical juncture in energy policy as we come to terms with the need to rapidly decarbonise our heat and energy supply. Through this project, we would like ordinary people to feel like stakeholders in these critical decisions, which of course they are, and not like powerless bystanders who have to live with the decisions made by an exclusive expert community. The project started in 2018 and runs until 2020, and it's funded by the UK Economics and Social Research Council and the Swedish Energy Agency. In this presentation, I'll tell you a little bit more about energy invisibility and why it's a problem, and how we're trying to tackle it and promote a greater sense of environmental citizenship through this project. I'll focus particularly on the aspects of the project that we've delivered in Sheffield, so you can perhaps personally relate to the project if you live locally. It's important to note that although I'll be talking about the project as though it involves face-to-face contact with participants, please note that we're in the process of converting the project to a virtual one with the help of the Energy Action project in Paris. So we're particularly interested in heat transitions in the context of this project. Heat accounts for around 83% of domestic energy use and around 78% of non-transport related energy consumption in the UK. And the project is premised on a recognition that since the shift away from burning solid fuels to heat our homes, which happened fairly rapidly from the 1970s onwards in the UK, as gas central heating quickly became the norm in many parts of the country, following much earlier rollouts of electricity connections, energy has become increasingly invisible in our everyday lives. However, we do recognise that around 5% of communities around the UK are yet to make the transition away from burning solid fuel or oil to heat their homes and don't yet have a reliable electricity connection. We're looking at those communities and how they might experience an energy transition through another project. We argue through this project that our relationship with energy in our everyday lives is, for most people, characterised by complete dependency and almost complete ignorance about where it comes from and what the environmental costs of its production are. Our awareness will usually only extend as far as how much it costs. In response to this, and because we've come to a crossroads in our future heat roadmap, we've developed a methodology for promoting a reconnection between citizens and energy. The project seeks to better understand our relationship with energy and how it's evolved to become so distant compared to a time when we were handling our own fuel and gauging the amount we use by eye, and to understand the consequences of this for urgent efforts to curb consumption. We ask whether research participation can promote a greater level of interest in and engagement with energy policies and decisions amongst so-called ordinary citizens by enabling first-hand encounters with energy generation. We're aiming for citizens to be better positioned to contribute to key decisions around our energy futures and perhaps hoping to effect lasting changes in environmental citizenship. And by environmental citizenship, we mean acting collectively and responsibly to protect and improve the environment, which some studies suggest can be possible when citizens are empowered to properly engage in a decision-making process about an environmental issue. The project brings together what we already know about how to promote citizen engagement in policy issues and to challenge ingrained perceptions in one methodology that is social, in that it offers opportunities for so-called social learning. It's embedded in an awareness of the energy landscape around us, and it's embodied in that it engages both body and mind, and it also tries to be sensitive to the past. We're testing the method and gathering data in the Swedish cities of Malmö and Lund, in the Scania region of Sweden, and also in Sheffield and Nottingham in the UK. In Sheffield, we've undertaken a case study of the Veolia energy from waste facility in Sheffield, where the city's refuse is burned to generate heat, distributed via a 47-kilometre heat network, and electricity exported to the grid. You may be familiar with the facility that sits on Bernard Road, alongside many of the main thoroughfares into the city, such as the Parkway, 2 tram routes and the railway line from the north. Or perhaps you've never noticed it, just a taken for granted part of the landscape perhaps. If you lived in Sheffield around the year 2000, you may have been more likely to notice the facility as it formed the site of a protest by Greenpeace, and I've included some news coverage of that on the slide. The facility has since been rebuilt to higher environmental standards since then. I'll say a little bit more now about the idea of energy invisibility, a concept that's central to the project and which has been studied for about 12 years now. So key commentators looking at this issue have argued that our contemporary relationship with energy is characterized by a double invisibility, in that it can no longer be seen nor connected back to our everyday actions. This distances us from our consumption and its consequences, a major problem in the context of urgent pressure to consume more wisely and reduce carbon emissions. Restoring some degree of visibility may help connect our everyday actions back to their resource implications. I was particularly struck by just how invisible energy can be when I was working in Sweden. There, municipal district heating schemes have been widely in operation in urban areas since the 1950s. They largely involve burning waste from households and businesses to generate low-cost heating for homes and businesses. If you rent your home in Sweden, then your heating costs are usually included in the rent, and it's common for heating to be charged at a flat rate regardless of how much you use. The heat is distributed via underground pipe networks and so is almost entirely invisible to the consumer. In the UK, many households maintain an awareness of how much heat they're using due to anxieties around high energy costs relative to income. These issues are much less prevalent in Sweden, and other forms of energy are generated in the north of the country, away from the main centres of population in the south, and are therefore also out of sight. A key motivation for this project came from walking around Linköping in the snow and seeing how the snow melt along the district heating pipelines. For a while, this hidden infrastructure was visible. The project is rooted in a real concern that we are disengaged from decisions about how energy is generated in terms of modes of generation and types of fuel, despite the significant consequences that heat policy has for our health, prosperity, and for the environment. Can you ever remember being consulted on how energy is produced locally? The only time this is likely to have happened is if a power facility is proposed near where you live. Under future planning proposals, we may not even get the opportunity to comment on those local proposals. Some argue that this distance from the decision-making process breeds mistrust and contributes to energy generation projects being regarded as contentious and controversial. We've now run 2 Walking with Energy events in Sheffield as part of the project, one through the ESRC Festival of Social Science, which is open to anyone, and another for policymakers from around the world scoping out future energy policy directions from their countries. I'll tell you a bit more about the Festival of Social Science event that we ran in 2018 to illustrate how the methodology works and what sort of impact it had on participants. Sheffield is a great case study for the project, as it's only one of a handful of cities in the UK to have a district heating network which distributes heat to businesses and some homes around the city centre and inner city via 47 kilometres of underground pipes, using water heated using the heat produced when our rubbish is burnt. Electricity is also produced and exported to the grid. And here's an image of people enjoying themselves in a power station during the event. To briefly summarise the method for our energy walks, they involve tracing the route of around a 2-kilometre section of the district heating pipeline to its source at the Veolia Energy Recovery Facility at Bernard Road. Along the route, we talk about some of the buildings supplied by the network and point out some of the energy infrastructure dotted along the route that we might otherwise not notice. We then take an access all areas tour of the facility led by Veolia, which provides an account of the main benefits and drawbacks of this approach to generating energy. There's plenty of time to ask difficult questions. In advance of participation, we ask people to complete a short questionnaire and visual psychological test to establish their current biases regarding different forms of energy generation, both clean and dirty, and we repeat it again after the tour to assess change. We don't have enough of this data yet to draw robust conclusions, but we also collect qualitative data from the conversations we have on the walk, and we also hold a debriefing session after the tour to gauge reactions. Here are some images from one of the tours of the Veolia plant, showing some of the things we saw, including what's known as the pit, a vast chasm with waste pouring in from around the city. It's so deep and vast that there is a genuine risk of vertigo when looking into it. We saw how the refuse is not sorted at all before being burnt at 900 degrees. We saw the ferrous and non-ferrous metals being extracted for onward sale, and learned about how the used filters in the chimney are disposed of. If you're curious, these filters get taken to an old salt mine in Cheshire where they will be stored for around 1,000 years. I've now got just a few quotations from participants who were on that tour reacting to what they'd seen. It's fair to say that at the outset of the event, the majority of participants were curious but ambivalent about energy from waste and had lots of misconceptions about what happened at the plant. Some were quite fired up by the idea that waste plastics were being diverted into the main refuse stream and away from recycling to fuel the energy from waste plant, a theory that was confounded when we toured the facility. By the end of the tour, a lot of myths had been busted and they'd all reached well-informed conclusions about this form of energy generation and all expressed fairly clear views on it. So a couple of those quotes now. We're consuming more and more, and I don't know how you tackle that, but at least this way you can stop the waste building up and deal with it usefully, keeping it out of harm's way. Personally, seeing all the waste is quite a sobering thing, coming face to face with the consequences of our overconsumption, seeing our waste pouring into a pit like that. One message that came through clearly in the debrief following the tour was that participants were particularly exercised by the fact that this model of energy generation relies on us maintaining currently high levels of waste generation and heat consumption. The tour also emphasised for several participants how different forms of consumption are interconnected, so i.e. the waste we generate and the heat and electricity we use. And this is especially the case in the context of an energy from waste system. For many participants, gazing into the pit represented an uncomfortable encounter with their own consumption. There was also some relief in the context of all the publicity around plastic waste ending up where it shouldn't, that this model of waste management kept our waste out of harm's way, as one participant put it. There was also a sense of relief that this waste wasn't ending up in landfill, as the facility operates a zero to landfill policy. So here's a quote just to illustrate this appreciation of interconnectedness that came from the event. You realise when you come here that it's all linked up, what we buy, what we waste, how we heat and how much we heat. So the more energy we demand, the more waste they need to collect. There's lots of focus on reducing waste, but this is always looked at in isolation of its impact on energy. You can save energy by consuming less, but systems like this rely on us consuming more, or the same maybe. None of this had occurred to me before this evening. In one participant, the experience appeared to induce a bit of a rebellion against the energy system that they realised they were locked into, and which for them represented an uncomfortable fit with their own values and beliefs on where we should be going in terms of energy generation. As they put it, it's made me think, I'm not happy with gas heating. I'd prefer something renewable, more like this, but it costs such a lot to convert it. It's not something you get a say in unless you have lots of money. I'd feel better if I was on a heat network, as I would know that gas wasn't being extracted to heat my home. A few concluding thoughts now to finish off. Should we care about where our energy comes from? I would argue perhaps that if energy was more affordable, which it very much isn't in the United Kingdom for a large number of households, around 3 million and growing, and production of energy was less damaging to the environment, then maybe our ignorance would be justifiable. But we're a long way from that position at the moment. The project, although it's still only halfway through, has already brought around 100 members of the public face to face with energy generation processes that they wouldn't otherwise have witnessed. And in some cases, this was the first time in their lives that they'd actually been face to face with heat production. Others had memories of building and maintaining fires during childhood, but had long lost touch with them. Different aspects of the Walking with Energy tours fulfilled different purposes, we found, but the incinerator tours, or first-hand encounters with energy production, appeared to have the most powerful impact on participants. We found evidence that the tours created an opportunity for so-called social learning, or learning in a social setting, that allowed participants to discuss their own thoughts and learn from those of others. There was a much greater value in the range of questions that were asked during the tour of the facility when in a group setting. And we're told by the literature that this type of learning offers the greatest scope for individuals to reevaluate embedded dispositions. Only time will tell if activities like this can foster a lasting increase in environmental citizenship, so get people more active and involved and sticking up for the environment and exercising their views in those key debates. But there is some evidence from studies conducted around 10 years ago that these kind of encounters actually might have some lasting impact in terms of environmental citizenship. Our experience so far demonstrates actually there is a really quite a high demand for these kinds of activities. We've had to operate waiting lists on most of our tours in the UK, less so in Sweden. But a big question is how we can extend the reach of the project beyond the usual suspects who are most motivated to take part in these kinds of things. And that's something we need to grapple with as the project goes on. Thanks very much for listening, and I'll be happy to take any questions you've got about the project and related issues.